This video is going to demonstrate how to get started with basic sketching and extruding on Autodesk Inventor. So our first object is here on the left, and it's a very simple object. And if we look at this object for its dimensions, we see that most of its dimensions are related to this two-dimensional sketch here. It even kind of gives you a hint because it uses darker black lines, thicker black lines, that all but one of the dimensions are attached to. The one dimension that we're not going to pay attention to in our first sketch is going to be this 1.5 inches. Because if you follow the arrows down to the extension lines, that's actually referring to the third dimension that we're not going to address until we finish our two-dimensional sketch, right? So we sketch in 2 dimensions and then we do a 3D feature to extrude it. This is our most basic form of computer-aided design, right, that we've talked about as a class so far. So I'm going to be mostly concerned with this, at least in step 1, and then step 2, 3D model with extrude. So I have my work plane over here. I'm going to start a 2D sketch. Really doesn't matter right now which plane that you select to draw on, but if I select this XY plane, then that will allow me to correctly orient this the first time without resetting it. But let's just say I chose the wrong plane, and I'm going to show you how to fix that later. All right. I have seen some people attack this with different ways, but I'm just going to use the most basic align tool. And as you go, you will probably start finding times to start your sketch on the origin or the center point to make your life a little easier, but I'm not going to do it right now. All I'm going to look to do is I'm going to ignore the dimensions that come out. It's much easier, in my opinion, to put in dimensions after you draw. So all I'm going to look to do is to get straight vertical and horizontal lines at this point. Now, you'll notice when you're using the line tool, it kind of wants to snap to that vertical, and I'm going to let it do that. I'm going to use that. Same thing with the horizontal. It kind of wants to snap to that, and it's telling me it's going to put in a perpendicular there, which is actually what we need and will make this a little bit easier for us. But I'm going to leave one out so that I have to put that in later. But essentially, it's just a skinny U is all it is. Now, do keep paying attention to what happens when it wants to snap. It keeps putting in constraints, which, as we know, constraints hold things together. They reduce how many dimensions I need to put in. So generally they're our friends, but sometimes we don't want what they're putting in. Now this one I'm going to leave a little bit off. So I allowed it to put in perpendiculars everywhere except that very last line. And so I'll have to put that in later. Now, if you had put that in before, that's one less step you have to do later. But I want to show you what happens if you don't, so that you know what to do when you're doing this. I like to start generally with the largest dimension first. So that would be this 3 inches on the bottom. Now, remember with dimensions, a lot of times, especially with simple, straightforward lines and rectangles, I can just click the line itself. But technically, the 100% always correct way is to select the 2 lines or points that the dimension is actually pointing at with those little arrows at the end. That is technically the right way to do it, and it sometimes it's a problem to just click the line. Now, so that is 3 inches. Now it looks like I lost everything, but in actuality, all it did was it made it larger. So I just have to zoom out, which I prefer to do with my mouse roller. Now the other dimensions should go in pretty easy. So I'm going to put in this 750. And if I look at the arrows and lines, I can see which lines it's pointing at. It's this one and this one, which is also the same as clicking that in this instance. 7.5. Now remember, if you don't have to put in zeros, the computer assumes zeros. Just make sure you get your decimal point in the right place. This is 1.5. Now, sometimes things like this happen, right? The computer is just making assumptions that this line is going to come down here, but since it's purple and there's nothing else, no other dimensions in its way, you can just drag that back. When things are purple, you can just click and drag wherever you want for the most part. Things that I've already dimensioned, it wants to hold those together, which is a good thing. Let's see what else I have. I have this thickness, this thickness and this thickness. And I just call them thickness because it helps me understand. But it's just another dimension. Now, there's no line here that I can click to get these two dimensions, so you have to click both lines, drag it down or drag it up. 22.5, and then there's one over here too. Now, since this line is perpendicular, I could click this, but it's just a really good practice to click the two lines. All right, so it says I have 3 dimensions left. It's telling me there's 3 things. Well, one of them I'm sure is this perpendicular that didn't get put in. You can see I can still grab and move that around. So the computer doesn't really know where that's supposed to be. I know it's supposed to be a right angle, so I'm going to grab a perpendicular constraint and put it in there. But just like most things, there's probably 3 or 4 ways to accomplish that. All right, now I'm down to 2 dimensions needed. So when I don't know what I need to do, what I like to do is start grabbing it and pulling it. And if it doesn't fall apart, then this object technically has all the information it needs. I don't have to tell it anything else. It's not falling apart, as I like to say. But I am able to move it all around my workspace, which I know to be fully constrained, this has to be, essentially this picture is floating around my wall. I need to nail it to my wall. And the best way to do that is to use the origin or center point. So I can do a couple things. I can take the point and I can drag and drop, and it'll give me a coincident, right? And it actually, that's easy and fast. Sometimes it doesn't work. Another way, probably the easiest way otherwise, is to grab the coincident constraint and just take any point. It doesn't even matter which one, and coincident those 2 points. And now I'm fully constrained and this 2D sketch is done. Now I need to go to 3D model, select my extrusion tool, and let's zoom out here. Now the extrusion tool, half the time it figures out what you want to extrude, especially when it's very simple. If it doesn't, you might have some open geometry where you think 2 points are coincident and they're not. That does happen. I know that this dimension needs to be 1.5 inches, so I'm going to put that in. Now, the one thing that might be bugging you is it seems like this one extrudes backwards and the one that we have on the screen is extruding forwards. If that bugs you, then flip the direction, have it extrude the other way. In Fusion, you would just have to put in a minus there, but with Inventor, you hit an arrow going the other way. And then that looks a little bit better. So I'm going to hit OK. Everything looks good except it's facing the wrong direction, right? I want to have exactly the same thing here. Now, you don't have to have these dimensions, or I don't want you to have these dimensions visible. They should be invisible. The reason you can see them here is so you know what to put in. But on yours, your finished product should be clean, oriented in the right direction, and following all of our criteria. So when I hit the home button up here, it's not facing the right direction. So here's what I like to do. I think this is the easiest way. Instead of trying to fool around with the view cube to get it to look right, I'm going to use my mouse roller and hold down Shift, and then that lets me orbit when it works, which it's not working right now. There it is. I like to get it as close as I can. Somewhere, I don't know, that's kind of close, right? But not perfect. So to make it perfect, now is when you use the view cube and you click the corner, and that gives you the perfect isometric view of these 3 planes. And so this is what I want to set as my home view. So I'm going to come over here to this little, I don't know, looks like an eject button. And I'm going to set my current view as home. I like fit to view. And now wherever I move it, when I hit the home button, guess what? It goes back to my new home. So that is object number 100% complete. Hopefully you found this helpful.